This is the opening to a short story of mine, and it's called University Hospital. One woman spoke to birds, birds that lived in the basement of the hospital and visited her room. These were sent by Satan to confuse her mind. In a raspy whisper, she told me everything. How hooded orderlies had taken her to the basement and a secret chamber, and, at the bidding of the birds, had covered her with mysterious dead plants. While she spoke, her hands pressed against the bed, fingers spread and then rose, hovering above the clean white sheets. She was helpless as they performed their rituals. She showed me the marks, slight red indentations, where they bound her wrists and ankles, creases that ran across her papery skin and thread-like black veins. Each day her husband hunched beside her praying, pressing his forehead to her wrist, while her wide eyes roamed across the ceiling. I stayed with her through the night. I'm not sure she could tell the difference. For an 8-hour shift, usually in the middle of the night, my job was to sit with patients whose maladies demanded constant observation. Some were close to death or recovering from extensive surgery. Hospital policy demanded that these patients, along with others with a host of lesser ailments, be under 24-hour watch. Most slept soundly. In the daylight, I was a freshman at a respected university. I was unsure about my exact course of study or even why I should attend the university. But I'd been granted a scholarship, and this had opened the door to a vague but welcoming world of possibilities. A week before the start of classes, nervous and excited, I'd taken a bus from the isolated Midwestern farm town where I'd spent my entire life. I rented a basement room across the street from campus and furnished it with an air mattress and a garage sale lamp. The ceilings were low. Dim light seeped through dirty windows recessed below ground level. But in spite of its shortcomings, I was pleased with my new home. When my clock radio played a favorite song, sometimes I danced, bare feet slapping on the rough cement floor. A few days later, my fellow students arrived, shining imported automobiles parked beside the ivy-covered dormitory across the street. Fathers in deliberately casual khaki trousers awkwardly embraced sons and daughters. Carefully folded bills were extended and accepted. When classes started, I studied my classmates, their backpacks, and their crisp new clothes, and their expensive pens. They talked about family business trips to California or Europe, while I slumped into a seat at the back of the room. One young man had been riding his motorcycle without a helmet. He would not be riding it again. You could see the scars, a web of thin pink centipedes beneath his stringy blonde hair. Sometimes he studied his hand with a puzzled expression or poked at the sickle-wielding skeleton tattooed on his forearm. He'd look up as I entered his room, greeting me with a squinty, crooked smile and a raised middle finger. Once I arrived for a midnight shift and found him muttering, lumbering in an awkward circle beside his bed. I moved my chair close in case he fell. He made a pitiful effort to punch me, a wide, weak swing that came at me in slow motion. I caught his fist in my hand and yelled for the nurse. Together we eased him into his bed. "It's okay now, Ronnie," the nurse whispered. I bound his wrists while she held his hand and wiped his whiskered chin. "Some days Ronnie just likes to give us a hard time," she said. When he calmed down, she massaged his knuckles and he smiled. He likes it if you touch his hands. Another patient was born with cerebral palsy. Though he was about my age and fully grown, he was not much bigger than an infant. I could have carried him in the crook of my arm, but his twisted, useless limbs all pointed the wrong direction. Wrists and ankles, elbows and knees, all bent at odd angles. He would never take a step or speak a single word. If he had a seizure, I'd yell for the nurses and hold him steady while they pushed a tube down his throat to keep him from choking. But most nights he barely moved, an innocent, misshapen cherub, gazing from his bed like a child waiting to be born. Sometimes I stared into the serene portal of his eyes, and he stared back as if he knew me, blinking peacefully. If God had been feeling whimsical on the day of creation, we might all look this way, gazing out peacefully into the world. After my days in the classroom, my nights in the hospital were like a retreat to another world, a strange, blue-lit refuge where I sat at the window, staring out into the sleeping quiet of my new city. In the hospital, very little was expected of me. In the event of emergency, If, for example, someone started drowning in their own mucus, it was my duty to push a small red button or yell down the hall to the nurses. But most nights were exceedingly uneventful. I drank coffee from styrofoam cups. I smoked tiny pin joints, smashed flat by the pages of my calculus textbook. Sometimes I studied, sometimes I stared into space, and sometimes, in a complete dereliction of duty, I slept. I'm going to read one other very short piece. Before EBOB was even a gleam in Lauren Becker's eye, she had an exploratory reading series, which I had the pleasure to read at. And at this reading series, I read a piece called Banana Slug Love, which had to do with banana slugs, and not so much love, but banana slugs and their sexual activities. And I was thinking about what to read tonight, and I had another piece which involves a rabbit who falls in love, so to speak, with a cat and their sexual activities. But I thought, no, I'm not going to read that. I'm going to go a little more literary for this crowd. And I'm going to read something involving dinosaurs and their sexual activities. With the highest literary intentions, let me tell you. This piece is the opening to a story in which the narrator, who bears absolutely no resemblance to your author speaking here, it goes through it tells a sad tale of sexual misfortune. And in the course of the story, the reader discovers that he projects just about everything as a sexual symbol. Again, no resemblance to the author. Before plunging into the meat of his own tragic tale, he delivers and regales the reader with this short soliloquy that I'm going to read to you right now. This is the introduction to my short story. It's called Stiffed. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but sex is never just sex. Case in point, Quetzalcoatlus. Quetzalcoatlus was basically the king of pterosaurs. They had a 40-foot wingspan, pretty decent processing power in their pterosaur craniums, and well-developed visual and motor skills. These guys were the largest creatures ever to have flown, and were the undisputed kings of the air in the Mesozoic era. They cruised around eating ground-bound dinosaurs like we eat buffalo wings. There are plenty of other dinosaurs around. Spiky dinosaurs, toothy dinosaurs, dinosaurs equipped with various flesh-ripping appendages, dinosaurs that could do some damage. But the other dinosaurs couldn't fly, and this made Big Q the de facto king of beasts. In fact, the only time Quetzalcoatlus was vulnerable was when they were on the ground, and it turns out the only really important work they had to do on the ground was mating. There's a reason that male genitalia are tucked away safely between our legs rather than sticking off of our foreheads. To a first approximation, the evolution of human physiology is basically an ongoing project to protect and enhance the ability to procreate. The same was true with Big Q. In a development that would have made Darwin proud, they evolved these funky little fingers on the leading edge of their wings. The fingers were not for picking up food. They had their monstrous beaks for that. The primary use for these fingers was the all-important task of clinging to the female of the species for purposes of procreation. By using these little hands, the females clung high up on the side of mountainous rocky outcroppings, far from harm's way. The males clung to the females, and in this somewhat gymnastic manner, the things that needed doing got done, enjoyably and safely. Throw in some rapid climate change, though, and things get awkward. A dinosaur can't afford to get too comfortable. Perhaps there are still plenty of blue-footed boobies, or whatever it is you like to eat. But what happens when they're about 100 miles away from the only topography where you can safely mate? That would suck. Maybe the males developed a lesser sex drive so they wouldn't be overly zealous when there was danger about. Perhaps they were willing to go the extra mile to the safety of their rocky outcropping in order to pursue their carnal pleasures, and ended up starving on the return trip. We may never know. But if these guys had developed the ability to do it in flight, they'd still be running the planet. We primates would have evolved an extra set of eyeballs on the top of our heads so we could watch out for them at the same time we searched around for fresh grubs. But that's not what happened. Quetzalcoatlus ended up as a historical footnote with an animated special on educational TV. And the future belonged to boring little birds who could hop on top of one another anywhere and get the job done. Thank you.